I got this small gimbal from work. It's suited for mobile phones, so I'll be trying it out for the weekend and see how it behaves. Okay, so first test shot with the gimbal. It's a small handheld gimbal of Chinese make. It's made for smartphones, so it can handle any large and heavy cameras. But my colleagues from work said that it should work decently for stabilizing the walking shake, and as I usually shoot my videos while walking, most of them suffer from massively shaking footage. So without discussing any specific topic, let's just walk around the garden, and I'll try to use the gimbal and see how it goes. Most of our garden is now ready for winter. I can quickly walk and talk about the individual beds. This one was the late flowering asters, which we keep mainly for late fall flowers and bee forage. This is late beetroot, almost all of it is harvested, and the second crop of kale, this was harvested 2 years ago, and a football, of course. The kids must have played in the garden. You can see some volunteer Swiss chard plants. Those self-seed prolifically everywhere. Some of them are red-leafed as well. The kale we harvest weekly, and this is the perennial arugula. So you can see how the soil has deep cracks in it. This is because we haven't watered in more than a month, and it hasn't rained. So yeah, very hot and very dry, and seasonably dry and hot weather. This one here, it was seeded with winter wheat as a cover crop, but it also had some corn germinate in the bed, which died with the frost. And you can see here where there is almost no germination of the cover crop. This is where the neighbor's hens came and scratched all of the mulch away. But already the wheat is more than 40 centimeters tall. This was seeded in early September, and we have some volunteer onions here as well for harvest. The borage plants are everywhere. We encourage them to grow. Usually just chop and drop them for mulch in the season, but now when there's nothing growing, I just let them be, and they usually die with the snow and the heavy frosts. Marigolds are still being harvested for their flowers, for tea and for tinctures. This is winter rye seeded bed. Nothing happening yet because of the dry conditions. This bed is a trial for late peas. They grew nicely and they flower, but now there is not much insect activity, so there's not much pollination. And although we have a few pots here and there, they're not really developing. So this one pot here, this is 2 weeks old. In spring this would have been already eaten by the kids, but you can see that it's not really done much. The seeds are very undeveloped here. So yeah, it's just a trial for the late peas. Maybe we should see them a few weeks earlier, but at least we can harvest and eat the pea shoots in a stir fry or a salad. Those are our latest flowers, a type of I'm actually not sure of the name for that in English, so I'll have to look it up. Those are self-seeded broad beans or fava beans. They are flowering now, as you can see, and we didn't actually expect them to grow here, but they did, because this bed in early spring, it was all 4 rows of fava beans, so those are the ones that ripened and fell on the ground and then started sprouting in autumn. This one is already winterized. This is the bed where we had our peppers, and it's also mulched and seeded with winter rye. This is the leek bed. We're leaving this for a couple more weeks because cold weather is not yet coming. You can see that it's very weedy, but this doesn't seem to disturb the leek very much, so we might end up watering because the soil here is very dry. I have dug a few places here and there to inspect the moisture level at about 15 centimeters of depth, but it really needs the watering if you want it to grow any larger. This here is the bed which we seeded with garlic. I already shot and uploaded that. I'm not really expecting to see any activity here for the next month, but the hens have been working here as well. We can see the mulch is circularly scratched away, so we might have to, I don't know, maybe put some sort of mesh on top of it. Because in the past, when the hens are scratching and the garlic is just growing, they tend to eat the growing tips. Those are the strawberry plants. You can see that they're preparing for winter by their red leaves, and you can see that those two sections are much more sparsely populated because I pulled about 200 strawberry plants out of those, and those two I have still not worked on, so this is something I have to get to now or tomorrow. They are overflowing out of the bed. This was meant to be a propagation bed for 4 different varieties, and this is some leftovers, mixed varieties from our old garden. So the idea is to have them grow here and pull the suckers out and transplant them to another dedicated beds for each variety. This is the bed where we had the sweet potatoes and the courgettes. It's now on the chilies growing, and it's now of course also mulched for winter. This is the old raspberry bed. You can see it's mostly weeds and grass here. This has to be dug out, and it will be done in the next week while it's still dry. Those raspberries are like a heritage to me from my late grandparents. They're very sturdy, very resilient. They can grow even in those very thick weeds, but their problem is that they have only 1 fruit set per year, so they get flowering and ripening very early, but then you don't get a second crop in the fall, unlike those guys which have 2 crops, even though they grow much weaker, and even though the bed is almost weed free, they're not as vigorous. You can see here that I use wild strawberries as ground cover. They don't allow much weeds to grow through. And this is my propagation bed for a few grape varieties and few flower varieties, and that's basically it. We have courgettes and tomatoes growing here. This is the most sunny corner of the garden, and also the drip line runs through there, so why not use the space? Down here we're now next to the microforest which borders our garden. This is the place where I propagate my hazel bushes from seed. All those are seedlings, and some planted out there in the back as well. This is a wild plum tree which I have grafted 6 or 7 varieties on that. Another hazel from seed. This is the Jerusalem artichokes. They have already been destroyed by the frost, so it's time to cut the stems down and use them as mulch, and maybe we will start harvesting next month from the tubers. Those beds, they were worked by the hands very strongly. You can see that they removed all of the mulch here and even dug some like scratch holes. This is where the tomatoes were this year. This section here is where I propagate my fruit bushes. So we have amelanchiers, some type of hawthorn, and down there we have already leaves dried out, those cuttings from different gooseberry varieties, red and green mostly. We have birch from seed here, some high bush blueberries, or American blueberries as they are called here, Rubus aureum, golden currant, some Kamchatkas and more currants and more golden currant, and those are white currants. And here a very small but still living honeyberry or Kamchatka plant, lots of them, maybe 20 something. Those are all direct rooted plants. I just pile soil around the stems and all the side branches become new plants. Those are 1-year-old cuttings of blackcurrant. This is the blackcurrant mother bush from which the cuttings came. Those are red currants and more haskaps or honeyberries. The occasional raspberry as well. Very nice. You can see that this raspberry is sending suckers along the drip line. So each fall I come and dig those out and plant them out, as those are the types, the varieties which have 2 harvests, and the second harvest is very late one. You can see here that we have still unripe fruit on them, which will continue to ripen the next days and weeks if the weather remains this warm. This is the Peruvian physalis here, which was covered with fruit, but sadly frost came before it could ripen, so the fruits inside are not ripe and they're green. They have to be bright orange to be tasty. So sadly none of that can be eaten, and we can't even save seed from it. We have to cut it and compost it. This bed has some turnips in it and some of the leftover leeks, and some strawberries which were planted here. It has to be watered. The hens scratched and dug here as well, and it needs some extra mulch. This was a bit of an experimental bed this year. It had early tomatoes and some leek for seed, which is not harvested. A few of the brassicas found their way in here. You can see that it needs weeding and then some mulch. This is another bed which was partially mulched. We have some volunteer kale here for harvesting, some peas also volunteering. Those are self-seeded, so they will become like a cover crop or green manure. At this end I have several apple seedlings. Those are 1 year old. They germinated this spring apples, which will be dug out and planted around and then grafted at some point in time. This bed here was constructed recently, and it was filled with 10 or more loads of lawnmower clippings from the basket. This is already germinating winter rye in this bed as a cover crop with some marigolds. You can see the main workers in the garden. They really enjoy this environment with the mulched beds and the soil life working so close to the surface. It's great for them, not so great for our winter cover crop efforts, but we can't have all. I'm certain that they do lots of good by eating snail and slug eggs and crickets and some of the pests we have. This is the kale and cabbages bed. We managed just a few cabbages this year, maybe 4 or 5 of them. They're still not fully ready and they're very small. The water has been nearly not sufficient, but still it's better to have something than nothing. This was another bed which was already winterized. This is the very late kale and some brassicas bed with some of the daikon type turnip, or maybe it's a type of radish. And you can see here those tiny little stems, those garlic heads which we failed to harvest, and they're germinating now. This is the mulch from the next bed, which have been removed by the hands, so lots of work working on that as well, putting everything in order. This is our original herb propagation bed. We have white oregano here, sorrel, lots of spearmint. Now it flowered and the seeds dried and it's re-sprouting. We have lemon balm. Those are self-seeded valeriana plants. We then have French tarragon, regular peppermint, lots of wild strawberries. I have maybe a dozen or so Henomeles seedlings here growing from a single fruit which I stuck in the soil. This is the rhubarb. You can see it's looking very sad because this hasn't been watered for many weeks. Nice creeping thyme mat here as an experiment to see how it copes with the other weeds. It's currently doing very well, even with no water, and it's basically competing with the wild strawberries, which I'm gradually digging out of here and spreading around the property. Our massive fennel plant, easily 2 meters 50 tall, and the seeds are not ripe yet. Maybe in a few weeks we'll harvest those. They're very good for stomachache and indigestion problems as a tea herbal medicine. And this here was the original flower bed, which was spring bulbs, and then We had zinnias and cosmos flowers here, but they have now died out. So that's about it from the vegetable garden and from my quick test of the new gimbal. I think that besides the sporadic glitches, it handles movement very well. But let me know what you think about it.